Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and this is the political postbox where I discuss some comments, some of the more engaged with comments that appear on the channel from the past week, and add my own thoughts into them. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So on to the first one. There's a bit of a mixture this week in terms of the old coronavirus, Brexit, and a couple of little Labour Party issues at the end. But the first one, crack on with the coronavirus. And someone's saying here, I've seen a video recently where basically they compared Austria and the Czech Republic. Both shut down on the same day, and the Czech Republic insisted everyone wear masks. The rate of infection fell in Czech Republic, but it kept the same in Austria. Austria then started saying wearing masks, and then the infection of the virus started to drop. And there's a couple of things with this comment that are being hotly debated at the moment. One is comparing different countries, because particularly in Britain, where we've got a government that clearly have not been taking the correct steps unknowingly. I don't just mean taking, there's a difference between not taking the right steps and missteps. Missteps, you may say, is when you're trying to take the right step and it isn't, it just turns out not to be, but you had the best of intentions and it just doesn't work out. It's a fast changing situation. The odd misstep will be expected, and indeed, although there are countries that we can say have done a really remarkable job, there isn't a country in the world where we can say they did everything right. There's criticism for every single country, but there are countries that have done pretty well. In Europe, we would point, for example, towards Greece and Germany in particular, but there's a bit of a mixture. And so in this country, the government would say, well, when you try and compare our response to another countries, you go, you can't really compare. Can we not? Why can't we? They would like to, well, there's lots of different factors. And there are lots of different factors, but that doesn't mean to say you can't compare. Because if we'd have done things exactly the same as, say, Germany, then, well, what is there about an island, which actually should have had an easier job, especially as we got longer to prepare than Germany? What would there be that would have offset that? But there was an interesting little thing that someone tweeted, a bit of a comparison, because where there is a really good comparison, in a unique position, a unique place within Europe, is Ireland, of course, because you have two parts of Ireland, each of which has a different government. And, you've got the Republic of Ireland, who are doing one thing, and you have got the Northern Ireland, who are essentially taking, although there's devolved parliament there, they're essentially taking a lead from the British government. And you get this sort of scenario, the two parts of Ireland, where Northern Ireland, in terms of COVID-19 hospital-based death rates, because that's all we can go for. In Britain, of course, we are only counting deaths that have occurred in hospital, not elsewhere. And we're not the only country to do that. When this was asked of ministers and said, well, why are you not including everyone who's died of it? They did say, well, there's other countries only counting hospital deaths, which is true. Some other countries are only doing that as well. That doesn't make it right not to include all of them ourselves, because there are also countries that are including all of them. But even when you just look at the hospital-based ones, in Northern Ireland, the rate is much higher than the Republic of Ireland. Now, why would this be? What is the difference? The difference is only the government. It's on the same island, for goodness sake. So there are comparisons you can absolutely draw. Now, if you want to then drill down into it and find out why there are those differences, okay, that's part of a much larger study. But you can absolutely compare certain countries. And when you've got countries, like Czech Republic and Austria, is not too bad because they're both sort of centralish Europe. And, if they go to lockdown the same day, but they don't lock down in quite the same way, then again, that is something you can definitely compare. But I would say, in terms of those who are, wanting to caution against comparisons, you wouldn't always just, of course, compare just two countries. But if you can draw lots and lots of comparisons with different countries, you start to get a bit of a Venn diagram, and then what is it overlapping with the countries who seem to be not suffering such high rates of death or even infection, and what is it about the countries overlapping there that are. And you do, when you've got enough of those countries compared, you do start to see the sort of things that are definitely the wrong way to proceed and some things that are definitely the right way to proceed. Next one. So, again, about different governments' approaches to coronavirus. Someone's saying here, just to give one example, how it goes with a government really cares about its citizen. Now, this is obviously talking about Switzerland. Before I go into the rest of the comment, I will just say Switzerland also had some missteps at the start. But anyway, it says the Swiss Army has started a purchase programme some days ago for more than 300 million face masks around the world, which arrives now step by step with very short shipment. And guess what they're going to do with it? A huge bulk of those masks are now to be forwarded directly to retailers across Switzerland and be on sale for the cost price to the public. At the moment, each citizen gets one box of 50 masks. I've got it. This is not from the Swiss government. My box of I've actually got 2 boxes of 50 masks. I had to get them myself. From outside the country, you will be unsurprised to hear. It says, at the moment, each citizen gets 1 box of 50 masks just for the cost price. As mentioned, just one example when your government cares about you. I mean, it's not necessarily even the government caring about you. It can be purely and simply, it's a pragmatic step. It's not a humanitarian step. It may be the Swiss government don't care about their citizens. I'm not saying they do, and I'm not saying they don't. But it's a pragmatic step. If you want this infection to abate, we know that it's in the population now. We know it's in the population. And the only way is to prevent people who are unwittingly carrying it from unwittingly spreading it. I could carry it. For all I know, I'm a super spreader. I do not know. But I'll tell you something. I've now taken action myself to be able to reduce the chance of me spreading it. And yeah, it's okay. Some people are using other types of face masks, the cloth face mask, fine. As long as you're using something, then you are at least reducing the chances of spreading it, and that will have a tangible effect if the whole country did it. But yeah, I don't view it as a government caring. I just view it as an intelligent step from a pragmatic government, and that's what makes it even worse in the UK. We have a government who don't care. I mean, that's just a fact. There's no point whining about that anymore. They don't care, and at the end of the day, the majority of people who vote for them know that they don't care. It's just that the majority of people who vote for them don't care about others themselves. Not all, but most. And that's fine. They think that they will personally benefit from having this uncaring government. It hasn't worked out like that, but there you go. You put your tick in your box and you take the consequences. But it's a madness to me that our government are just not intelligent enough. Nothing to do with caring. They're not intelligent enough to realise they need to do this. And of course, what is going through their pea brain at the moment is we can't do it because there aren't enough face masks in the country, and we haven't even got enough for the NHS, so of course we can't advise people to get them. We'll advise them to wear scarves around their head instead. Alright, it's better than nothing. But if a scarf would do the job, you would just use a scarf in hospitals and then wash them and then give the surgeon, can I have my scarf please? It's not how it works because they're not actually as effective. And the virus is going to pass from you to the outside air around you. In a hospital, it'll do it out in public as well. So there's such nonsense being talked about this in this country. It's absolutely ridiculous. But ultimately, it comes down to this. This country, our government has failed to source enough face masks. And even if you were just going to go for a crapper form of it, like a scarf around your head, then that should have been insisted upon from the start. If in Britain when we'd had the lockdown, which was itself at least 3 weeks too late, if we'd have said at the time, but when you do go out in public, you must have your nose and face covered with cloth at least, that still would have had a beneficial impact, surely. But they didn't even do that. And that's not something that would have impacted on stocks of PPE for the NHS, because they would have said, get a piece of old cloth or a scarf or something, put that on your head, and if you don't, you're not allowed to go out. But if you go out, you have to put this thing on. At least if you're going to go out and go into a shop. I'm not talking about going for your normal walk, because there you're supposed to maintain your 2 metre distance from others anyway. But I mean, when you have to go inside a shop where that's impossible, even though you'll try. And I've been to some shops where people really do try. They're trying their best, and it works pretty well if it's not too busy. And I've been to some where I've looked at a situation, I've gone, 50% of people are trying and 50% are just not giving a crap. You know, I've been to some shops before and people just walk right up to you because they want something that's on the shelf next to you where you're not lolling about, you're just getting your stuff. They're just coming up to you and grabbing it and buggering off. But I would say half of people are trying. But anyway, there we go. That's a bit of a rambling one. But that's my view on that. I don't think it's anything to do with caring. I think it's just pragmatism. Our government lacks that basic intelligent pragmatism. The next one. Who exactly are the scientific advisors? So, British government, of course, famously saying it's following the science, as all governments are. I think you'd have to be a pretty stupid government at the moment not to say you're following the science. But it's a bit doubtful in Britain's case because our science seems to be wholly at odds with everyone else's, as if, you know, the laws of physics are somehow different in Britain compared to the rest of the world. And the question asked here, who exactly are these scientific advisors? Now, it has to be said, this person did ask this question before we sort of found out in a roundabout way, in that on our scientific panel is Dominic Cummings, who is a man with a history degree, and a mate of his from the Vote Leave campaign, who is a mathematician. He has a PhD in physics. He produces mathematical models, but that's it. I mean, he's not the foremost authority in his field in the country, so he's got no more reason to be on this panel, frankly, than Dominic. I mean, I suppose a little bit more because he is at least a scientist, but so our scientific advisory panel is being led by a historian. It's been led politically. You know, that has now been, that's come out. And it's not speculation. The government have basically, they've not admitted that it's been led by a historian, but they've admitted that he's been on the panel and that he's been involved in discussions. They're not even trying to say that he was just an observer. So, yeah. So who are the scientific advisors? There are people on that panel who absolutely, because we know some of them, and some of them are absolutely experts in their field. No doubt about it. They're the sort of people who should be in there. But quite frankly, people have suggested that maybe they shouldn't, on the basis that it's a soundproofed political box. So nothing that's been discussed in there is being revealed to the public. The only thing that is being revealed to the public is what the government say the panel have advised, but it may not be what the panel have advised. And in a situation like that, should these scientific experts be a part of it? I mean, you know, if I was one of them, I would like to think I would resign in protest. As soon as Dominic Cummings came in and started talking and meeting, which happened, you know, last month, back in March at least, I'd have said, no, I'm out of here. This isn't what the scientific panel is supposed to be about. We're supposed to have scientific experts on it, not this guy. I'm off. And frankly, anyone remaining on it, I can only think of one of two possible reasons why any genuine expert would remain part of SAGE now. One, because, you know, selfish reasons, they think they might be up for a knighthood or a damehood later along the lines, and that's, you know, what they want. Or two, there could be a genuine reason. They could think to themselves, well, at the end of the day, if I leave it, I am the expert on this, and that expertise is then being lost to the government, and maybe one day the government will actually decide to listen to this expertise. They're not at the moment, but maybe one day they will. And that could be a genuine reason for doing it, but I would still disagree. I would say that the best thing you can do if you're on this panel at the moment is to resign and actually just go public. Just go public. And just explain the reasons for your resigning, explain that it's an absolute farce, a fiasco, and more good will come of that. More good will come of that. And offer your advice to the media. Just explain to the media what your advice would be. Now, that's not ideal because, as I say, an individual expert is not going to be able to inform a cohesive strategy. You want people from lots of different disciplines to discuss things amongst each other. That's what SAGE is supposed to be about, because any individual, as expert as they are, cannot decide on the right course of action because they're expert in a very narrow field, and there's lots of different fields that are all relevant at the moment. But at the moment it's not working because it goes through a political filter. Everything that comes out of that panel goes through a political filter, and it's basically like, oh, this advice, we're okay with this, so we'll advise that. No, this piece of advice doesn't fit with our Tory ideology, so no, the political filter will remove that. No, you can't work it like that. Next one. So on to a bit of Brexit. So it's saying here they want a hard Brexit, referring to the UK side that is messing about with these talks. No more EU rules, then bring back fox hunting to usher in a Tory utopia. Now, certainly it is, yeah, the thing about the rules. So Brexit was billed by many of the Brexiteers as being, we don't want to follow EU rules. And it was sort of true and sort of not true. It was misleading, shall we say. Which EU rules and who has to follow them is the issue. Now, the way it was billed to the public is you, Joe, members of the public, are having to follow these most unfair EU rules and it is blighting your lives. And of course that was untrue. This is why if you go up to any Brexiteer and say to them, can you name me one EU rule that is negatively affecting any part of your life? They can't ever answer the question because, first of all, they may try and answer it with something that actually isn't an EU rule at all. It's just made up. Remember, Boris Johnson's former job before he became a politician was to make up fictional EU rules in order to disparage it. He was in the same crew as came up with the bendy banana thing. It was all untrue. Bananas have always been bendy. They're still bendy. They've always been bendy. And the ban on prawn cocktail crisps. Oh no, the EU banned prawn cocktail crisps. They're still available and they've always been available. I could go on. So, they don't actually negatively affect our lives, members of the public's lives. They're actually beneficial. Because if they weren't beneficial, they wouldn't be beneficial in other countries either. And they would never have been voted through. It's that simple. But were they lying completely? Not really, no. Because if you are a Tory MP, for example, particularly if you're an influential Tory MP, especially if you're a minister in a Tory government, then EU rules do constrain you a little bit. So that's the people who didn't like the EU rules. It was absolutely them, because they want to be free to screw us over completely. They don't like the idea of holiday allowance for workers, getting some time off in the year. They don't like the idea of having to factor in breaks in the working day. So, what do you mean we can't work them like dogs for 16 hours straight? So those are the rules they want to get rid of. And this is absolutely true. And this is why they are fighting like rabid dogs for the hard Brexit, because they absolutely, it is true to say, do not want any EU rules, which of course is what's making the EU deal completely impossible. However, the notion that this will lead to some sort of Tory utopia seems a bit baffling because, and I know how you could sort of think it, because you could look at America and you say, well, essentially what the Conservatives want is what already exists in the United States. So it already exists there. And quite a lot of people in the United States go along with it. Defend it even when it screws themselves over. The problem is that people in this country, and I'm not saying it could never happen in the future, but at the moment, the people in Britain do not have that same mindset. Now, in America, for example, taxes are a dirty word. In this country, they are not. Polls consistently demonstrate that not just a simple majority, but a large majority of people in this country do not begrudge taxes. We don't have that hate relationship with taxes. In fact, the majority of people in this country are quite happy for taxes to go up if, there's always a proviso, if it means that, for example, the NHS is properly funded. Now, the reality is we already pay enough taxes to properly fund the NHS. We're giving all our taxes to billionaires, not all of them, quite a lot of them, to the already wealthy, which is part of the problem. But yeah, we don't look at taxes as something, or the Tories do. This is the Conservative way of thinking. It's not the general country's way of thinking. Even though we keep voting for Conservative governments. But you'll notice, what is it about general elections? What do the Tories always promise? Do they promise to privatise the NHS? No, they say they will never privatise the NHS. Matt Hancock, the current Health Secretary, says there's no privatisation of the NHS on my watch. Well, yeah, there is. He's just given out a load of contracts for NHS services just now, including some that personally favour him. And it's, so you can't really see how we move to that position, particularly as the hard Brexit means having to do without any trade agreements, not just with the EU, but the world in general. or the bulk of the world in general, about 97% of our trade agreements just go up in smoke overnight. And that is going to have an effect that people will notice. Like anything that happens to the economy, you can fool people. Like you can fool people about unemployment figures. An individual will know whether they are employed or not. But you can fool them about the general employment lay of the land in the country. You can fool them about the economy. You know, they were talking about the fact end of last year for the general election, the Conservatives were saying we had a buoyant economy. No, we didn't. We had a stagnant economy. That was an objective fact. But you can fool people because people don't bother looking. They don't read the Financial Times. They don't read the economic news anywhere. You can fool them about the economy. You can fool them about what's happening in the country at large. Well, you won't be able to fool them. You know, you can try if you like. But what you won't be able to do is when, you know, the hard Brexit comes and the shelves are empty again, but this time they're not being restocked anywhere near as quickly. You can't say to people, oh no, the shelves are full. You can try, but it won't work. So yeah, I don't see how it is going to usher in their utopia. I don't really want to find out how it's going to, if indeed they have a cunning plan. But I'm not seeing it. But absolutely, the EU rules. It's for the people in government that don't like EU rules, not the rest of us. Next one, it says the Conservatives. This was about Priti Patel's not latest piece of nonsense, actually, the former piece of nonsense, in terms of potentially creating a policy that is going to involve deporting lots of doctors and nurses, which would be more than a little embarrassing, to say nothing of self-defeating. But anyway, it says the Conservatives here putting more effort into doing the wrong thing than it could ever take to do the right thing. But this is, you know, this is right. This sort of struck with me, this, because they are. There's so many things that they've resisted doing that they've since had to do. You know, take, for example, just the lockdown. At a time when we should have been going into lockdown, Boris Johnson was deriding, you know, other countries, ridiculing other countries for doing the same thing that he then had to do. Now, if he'd have done it earlier on, it would have been less effort, because the problem was that he had to then order a lockdown after spending weeks saying we're not going to go into lockdown because that'd be a stupid thing to do. Well, do you know what? Guess what? There's now lots of people not engaging with it in this country because the government said it was a stupid thing to do. They will, if you just say to them, well, why do you think the government have ordered it now? They'll probably just say, oh, political pressure, which it actually was, political pressure. The Conservatives still don't want the lockdown to go on. So failing to get it right from the start means more effort, because you now have to put in more effort to persuade people that you were talking rubbish before, but now you're absolutely on the button. And same with PPE. It would have been so much simpler to have stockpiled much earlier on. I mean, I'm not even talking back in January. I'm talking last year. It was already noted in this country that we did not have the stocks to deal with a pandemic, which we knew was coming. We knew it was coming. No one was seriously suggesting that there's not going to be any more major health crises in this country. They were saying, no, one is coming, and it's going to happen over the next few years. It happened this year. Well, technically at the end of last year. We found out about it big time this year. You know, that would have been easier to do when there wasn't the massive demand on stocks. But even then, again, about more effort to do the right thing. You know, again, the ventilator. And I know the ventilators is not the be-all and end-all of it. It's just, but it's so symptomatic. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, it's symptomatic. So we knew that we were short of ventilators. Other countries ordered more ventilators. They take time to produce and get to us. So doing it early would have been good. Now, the government could have just done that. They could have said, right, we need however many more ventilators, put orders in, they'll come when they come. We couldn't have then criticised them because the order's in. I mean, we could have criticised them for not having maybe enough before. But we're talking about surge amounts needed for extra critical care. So is that what the government did? No. What they did is they went, right, we want a new design of ventilator. And they went around lots of companies that don't make ventilators and said, I want you to design a new one and to deliver it to us. That takes more effort. Now, I could understand it if you've ordered ventilators from everywhere you can order ventilators from that, you know, meet the normal specs. And then that wasn't going to be enough. So then you approached other companies as well. But they didn't do both. They did one or the other. So they chose to try and get companies, engineering firms, to design and test and build new ventilators. That is more effort than just ordering ones that you know work. And I know the reason why they did that. But it was just an example of more effort. And have we got any of these? No, we don't. Will we ever get any of them? I don't know. Maybe. But we haven't had them for when we had our greatest need. So what did we do instead? To make sure we didn't run out of ventilators, we just turned patients away. That's what we did. We just said, no, you're not actually allowed in here. This is a hospital. It's for sick people. You're too sick. No. So it is. And it's pervaded almost every department in government. I'm not going to say too much about the Treasury right now because there's still, for my mind, a little bit of uncertainty as to how well the Treasury are doing. There's certainly things they should be doing better and faster, but they have had a change of Chancellor who doesn't seem to be making a complete arse of things, it has to be said. So I'll go easy on them. But every other department absolutely seems to genuinely be putting in more effort into doing the wrong thing than the right thing. I mean, even the Foreign Office, Dominic Raab's department, you say, well, he couldn't get that much wrong, could he? Foreign Affairs. But actually he could, because at a time when we knew that this was going to be a pandemic, we were still not telling people not to travel abroad. You know, when countries were going into lockdown and we had all these stranded Britons all over the world, most famously in South America, Peru and places, were moaning at the government, whoa, we're trapped here. Yeah, because you decided to fly thousands of miles away to a remote part of the planet from our point of view during a global pandemic. What were you playing at? The individual holidaymakers were pretty stupid. But why was the Foreign Office not stopping them? Ministries are there. They exist to stop us being stupid. You're supposed to say, there's a pandemic coming. Countries are going to go into lockdown. Don't go abroad. Stay here. But they didn't. So we couldn't even get that right. That's all he had to do as well. That's pretty much all the Foreign Office had to do. You know, stop our citizens getting stranded abroad. Couldn't even do that right. Anyway, there we go. Right then. Last couple of ones is sort of labour issue. So this sort of from Keir Starmer's PMQs, but neither of them directly related to Keir Starmer himself. So first one here saying, one interesting question that needs to be asked. So this is all talking about your questions that should be asked at Prime Minister's Questions. And there's any number of questions that didn't need to be asked. But it's saying here, one interesting question that needs to be asked about is the Russian reports that Boris Johnson is still sitting on. Or is there an election we don't know about that it could interfere with? Yeah, well, still sitting on. If he were just still sitting on it, it would be less worrying than what I think is the reality. And I discussed this some time ago. The last time I think I talked about the Russian report being suppressed. I think with his large majority, his plan is now not to keep suppressing it. He has kept suppressing it. He's not released it. I don't think it's ever going to be released. I think something that claims to be the Russian report will be released. I think his plan, in fact I know his plan, is to get it completely rewritten along his lines. So the Russian report as known is never going to be released, or at least not during this government's time. But in terms of asking questions about it, and you could say, well, this is a top priority surely. It's an extremely important question. Is it as urgent as some others? Potentially not. But the issue is there's an awful lot of reports that the government are suppressing. In fact, I would suggest at the moment the most urgent report that they are suppressing is actually the Cygnus report, which is a report into an epidemic. You know, it was a study that was done a few years ago by the Conservative government when Boris Johnson was a minister, I believe, and Priti Patel as well, come to think of it. Not Dominic Raab. And it basically asked the question, how ready would we be for a major flu pandemic or a major flu epidemic in the country? And, you know, the answer was not very well. But two things. First of all, the report was quashed, apparently, because it would be too terrifying to release to the public. And secondly, there were a number of recommendations to make the situation rather less terrifying that were not followed through on. None of them, as far as I can tell. So I would say that is much more urgent at the moment. If you're going to ask questions, remember, you don't get to ask loads of questions. You don't just get to pin down the Prime Minister or whoever's deputising for the Prime Minister and sit there for 2 hours questioning them. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. You get 6 questions, and as I said in the video, actually you shouldn't ask 6 questions. You use only 6 questions, of course, but you don't ask 6 questions because that only works if you're getting an answer to each question you ask, but you're not. So you have to hammer the point home. So in effect, Keir Starmer actually only asked 3 questions last week, but it's important. It's better to ask 3 questions where you're really exposing the government's lies than to ask 6 questions where you let them deflect every single one. So there's a certain limit here. And the Russian report, as important as it is, and it will have to form part of questioning at some point. At the moment, I think there are more urgent questions, if I'm going to be honest. And then the last one, which is a purely Labour one. So I was going to do a video on this, and it became just increasingly weird. But I'll tackle it here. There's no other questions if people can't be asked with internal Labour antics, by the way. Thanks very much for watching if you have. So, someone here saying, I find a little bit of background for those who may know what it was. So, basically, Labour has had an anti-Semitism problem for the past few years. It's not, and it's one of those things where, depending on who you ask, you'll have Corbyn supporters, for example, who some of them will describe, not all Corbyn supporters by the way, but some of them will describe it as a smear. Like, there isn't a problem with the Labour Party, it was just something that was used to smear Corbyn. And the proof of it is that the media are no longer attacking the party for anti-Semitism. That proves it. No. Because to say that is to call Jeremy Corbyn a stinking liar. Because, to his credit, and I, by the way, for the record, do not believe that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. There are a number of his allies who are. He is not. I don't believe he is. But he has never, ever, ever once said that it is not a serious problem. He hasn't even just said that it exists in the party. He has said that it's a problem in the party. And what we mean by that, we're not saying that a member of the party, engages in anti-Semitic rant. You don't blame the party for that. You only blame the party if then nothing is done about it. Particularly when it's proven, when there's recordings, which there have been in a number of cases. It becomes a problem for the party when, even when there's recordings and it is beyond dispute, the allegation, you still do not eject them from the party. Or when the media intensity is so high that you're forced to, otherwise you look really bad, and then when the heat's died down, a month later you let them back in the party. That is when it becomes a problem for the party, and that was happening. And Jeremy Corbyn never denied it. Even as late as last year, he was still saying it's a major problem in the party, but that he was dealing with it. That was the problem, saying he was dealing with it. And there's an awful. And what has happened is a report has come out into anti-Semitism. Now, a lot of Corbyn supporters are using this as evidence that Corbyn was stuffed by the Labour Party, and the reason why the elections were lost apparently is no longer to do with Brexit. Or it was to do with Brexit. Oh, but it's not our Brexit position. It's not because we're not Tory enough anymore. Oh, it's because these people were mean to Jeremy. And first of all, I will say this. 1, this report is not an independent report. It's written by people appointed by Jeremy Corbyn. You don't get... You could almost imagine this report as being, report on how Jeremy Corbyn was screwed over by people in the Labour Party, written by Jeremy Corbyn. It's that level of childishness. However, there are serious aspects to this report. One of them, and this is what the person's talking about here, and I'll read the comment in a moment. One of them is that there were members of Labour headquarters staff, people paid by the party, who were not really in favour of Jeremy Corbyn and sometimes acted to frustrate what he was trying to do in the party. So I'll read the comment now. It says, I find it odd that no mention of news that Labour grandees conspired to ensure that Jeremy Corbyn's left-wing opposition would lose the 2017 election. Well, they didn't, and the report doesn't even... And remember, anything the report claims, it's not independent. It's written by Jeremy Corbyn's appointees. The report doesn't even claim that. I think that had the Labour Party under Corbyn won, we'd have had a properly funded NHS. Yes, we would, but we'd have had a properly funded NHS, with Ed Miliband, if Ed Miliband had won. We'd have one if Keir Starmer wins next. But I ain't disputing that. If Labour had got in, the NHS would have been properly funded, and we would have actually been prepared for this pandemic right now. As prepared as we can be. Remember, it's a big one. So I agree with that statement. The same members of the Labour Party kept up a campaign of harassment against Diane Abbott. No. Actually, no. Diane Abbott did not have a campaign of harassment within the Labour Party. She's occasionally faced criticism because at the end of the day, she does say stupid things at times. I was not one of the ones. I mean, I will criticise. I'll be honest, I have deliberately not criticised her when she said something stupid because it has to be said, the hate she gets from Tory supporters and the Tory party is clearly racist and sexist. And so sometimes the problem with you criticising when you've also got proper hate in there, it gets mixed up in it. So I tended to give her a wide berth there. So her only crime seems to be that she happened to be a female black left-wing politician. She said stupid things. Not all the time. She's not an idiot. But every now and then she did or said something stupid, for which criticism is fine. There was no campaign against her. You can argue there's a campaign against Corbyn within Labour, but not Diane Abbott. There never was. So why the silence? Do you really think it's okay for some of the Labour Party membership to plot against the party? Here's the thing. The Labour Party leadership did not plot against the party. And this report does not even make that claim. And if it did make that claim, remember it's a report written by Jeremy Corbyn. Or people he's appointed. But what I will say, as the clear thing on this, I am a Labour Party member. I am absolutely, whether I was or was not, I'm absolutely free to criticise the Labour Party leadership and anyone within the Labour Party. And I will always state the reasons for my criticism. I don't just make shit up. I will state my reasons. However, if I were paid to be a member of the Labour Party, whether that be as an MP or more especially whether it be some sort of admin within Labour Party HQ or something like that, zero right to publicly criticise the leadership. Just like I would not criticise my employer. I've worked in education. There have been colleges and schools I've worked at where I absolutely have criticisms of the leadership, and I'll say so privately to those leaders. I'll sometimes even use the phrase, "Are you stark raving mad?" But I will never publicly criticise them, because I'm a member of staff, and that comes with it some loyalty. Now, if your leadership is doing something criminal, then you've got every right to whistle blow if they're breaking the law. But because you disagree with them on a political point of view, no, you get no right to do that. So if any members of Labour Party HQ have briefed against the leadership as paid members of the Labour Party or acted in any way against the instructions of the leadership, that is unacceptable, and they should have been dismissed, and they should not be working for the Labour Party. But as Labour Party members, absolutely free to criticise. So that's what I will say on that one. And that's it for this week. If you made it this far, well done. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, and if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.